Very good morning to all. In today's session, we are going to learn about the concepts of demand and its elasticity. So let's begin with the concept or a definition of demand. So in economics, demand is a quantity of a good or refers to a quantity of goods or services that a particular consumer is willing or able to buy at a particular point of time at different prices that exactly called demand. So, in other words, I could say a demand is the desire of a consumer who can able to purchase a commodity, but it's not as same as desire. So, desire is just a wish of a consumer that he wants to purchase a product even he's unable to buy it. That's called desire. But demand is refers to a quantity of a good or any sort of service that a particular consumer is willing to buy, an ability to pay to buy such product at a given period of time at a given price. That exactly called demand, and that's why there is a difference between the desire and demand. So desire is something, a wish of a consumer, but although he's unable to pay to buy that product, that's called desire. The demand is something like a desire to purchase a product and is able and willing to spend a sort of money to buy that product at a given price, or have a sufficient power of or purchasing power. That's called demand. There are four essential elements of demand, that is the quantity of the commodity, their willingness of a consumer to buy a product, time period and a period and price of a commodity at each quantity level. Now we can come up to the characteristics of demand. So the first one is a dynamic in nature. It's very true that demand is a dynamic in nature, which means that demand for any commodity does not remains the same all the time. It keeps on changing. There are plenty of factors which ultimately affect the demand for a commodity, and any organization has to consider every factor to fulfill their present demand of the consumers. Next one is the expressed with respect to time period. Demand for a commodity is expressed with reference to time. Even the price of a commodity remains the same, but the demand will always change in a day, in a second, in a minute, in a month, in a year, in a week, etc. Next one is depends on price. That's very true that demand for a commodity, it depends on the price level of it. It means if the price of a commodity change, then demand will also change. So automatically there is an inverse relationship between the demand and the price of a commodity. And if any change in the price of a commodity, then definitely demand will also get changed. Let's take an example to understand this. If the price of a commodity, of any commodity, increases, that means the demand will become decline and vice versa. Depends on supply. Likewise, like price, the demand is dependent on the price. Same, the demand is also depend on price, but there is an inverse relationship or a negative relationship between the supply and demand for a commodity. So with the low supply, people get ready to pay any price to get the product. So automatically that means there is a negative relationship between both the terms towards a commodity. Next one is sensitive to the competition. So demand for a commodity is affected definitely by a stiff level of competition or any sort of competition in the market. So if a manufacturer has a monopoly on the product, that means of one market, of one manufacturer, or the one you can see the seller in the market, that means their demand will become at a peak level and the company can sell the product at any price they want. Same in the same way, if the numerous sellers or the numerous manufacturer in the market and they are selling the product, that means there are high competition in the market and the value or the price of such product will get decline in the market and ultimately the demand will also get low, and that's why its demand is very sensitive to the competition, because depending upon the competitive level, then automatically the demand will also get affected in the market. Next section is the individual and market demand. So there is the two main types of demand, that is individual and market demand. So individual demand for a commodity is a quantity demanded by a consumer and his willingness to buy any sort of product at any possible price that a consumer is willing to buy and spend on it. And that's called individual demand. For example, RAM has a demand of 20 units per month of a commodity X at a rate of 50 rupees. If a consumer RAM is willing to spend 50 rupees to buy 20 units per month of commodity X, that means it's called individual demand. What is market demand? Market demand for a commodity is a quantity demanded not of an individual consumer, it's of all the consumers of the market, along with their willingness and ability to pay for that product at a given possible price during a particular period of time. It's called market demand. Let's take an example to understand this concept. There are six consumers of X, and their consumption in a month is 10, 20, 25, 30, 40, and 50 respectively. Hence, the market demand means all the consumption, that means the total consumption in the month is a market demand for that X. That means the market demand for X will be 175X. That means 10 plus 10 units plus 20 units plus 25 plus 30 plus 40 plus 50. It becomes 175 X. That means the market demand is a summation of all the units of a particular consumer which he or she consumed any product according to its willingness and ability to pay for them. And that's become the market demand. So let's begin with the next section, that is the determinants of individual demands. So in the particular diagram, there are five main determinants. That is the price of a commodity, price of a related goods, income of the consumer, expectation of change in the price of a commodity in the future, and their taste and preferences. So let's begin with that. The first one is the price of a given commodity. This it is a most important factor which ultimately affect the demand of a commodity, that's called price. So as I said earlier that there is an inverse or a negative relationship between the demand and the price of a commodity. For example, if a price of a coffee decreases, that means the people who are earlier took the coffee, Now, in the past, now they can purchase more and more coffee. Then ultimately, it increases the demand of coffee. So this is how the price plays a very important role in affecting the demand of that same commodity. So if I take a price of sugar increases, that means it will affect the demand. That means it will decrease the demand of sugar for the consumer or by the consumers, and that's called the price of a given commodity. That's why there is an inverse relationship. So if a price of a coffee decreases, that means it increases the demand. If the price of a sugar increases, that means that their demand would get decreased. Now we can talk about the next factor, that is the price of a related goods. Then this is also the one of the main factor where the demand of a commodity, it's totally depend on the change in the prices of related goods. So automatically there are two types of related goods. The first one is substitute goods and the second one is the complementary goods. So let's understand these two concepts and how it would influence the demand for commodity. So let's understand these two concepts. First one is substitute goods. These goods which can be used by a consumer in place of one and another to satisfy a particular want, that's called the substitute goods. So if any of the two goods which are used in place of one another by a consumer just to satisfy the want, that's become the substitute good. So if a price of a substitute goods increases, then the demand for a given commodity will also increases and vice versa. That means there is a positive relationship between the price and the demand of a substitute good. So let's take an example, a decrease in the price of a substitute good, say tea, will reduce the demand for a given commodity, say coffee. So automatically there are two products, tea and coffee. If the price of a tea decreases, then ultimately it will increase the demand for a coffee by the consumers. Because after all, consumer feels a lesser cost to pay for coffee. So automatically it will increase the demand for a coffee, and that's become the substitute goods. So I like coffee and the price of if a price of a substitute good tea would get declines, then automatically the demand for a coffee would get declined. So automatically there is a positive relationship between these two products. Now we can come up to the complementary goods. The goods which are used together by consumers just to satisfy their want is called complementary goods. Let's take an example to understand this particular concept. A decrease in the price of a complementary goods, let's say sugar, will increase the demand for a good, let's say tea, coffee, because the cost of using the both products together will be relatively less. So that's become the complementary good. That means there is a positive relationship between the two products, but in case of the substitute, there is a negative relationship between the two substitute goods. So when we take an example of the substitute goods, that means let's take a another examples like Coke and Pepsi. So if there is a decrease in the price of Coke, that means it will reduce the demand for another product, say uh, Limca. So that is called the substitute good. That means there is a positive relationship between the two goods. Next, we can talk about the next factor, that is the income of the consumer. The demand for a commodity also changes with the change in the consumer income. So automatically, when a particular consumer income increases, then automatically their demand for a particular commodity will also increases. That means the effect of income on the demand of a commodity depends on its nature of good, and the two types of goods comes under the income of the consumer, that is the normal good and the inferior good. Normal goods, so these are the goods whose demand increases with an increase in the consumer income. For example, if the consumer income increases, the consumer will buy more and more normal goods. Let's take an example, a mobile phone. So if the consumer income get increased, the consumer is willing to buy a more superior goods than in the past. So if the consumer having iPhone 10, then automatically if the income increases, he or she can buy more superior goods than in the past, that then in the iPhone 10 it can buy iPhone 14 as well, and that's become the normal good. Inferior goods. These are the goods whose demand decreases with the increase in consumer income. That's very true. Like for example, if a consumer having a refrigerator at his home, and now he's trying to exchange that refrigerator with a heavy discount, that term as a inferior goods. As the income is goes increasing, but the demand for a commodity will become decline. That means he will shift that good with the another good, and that means their demand decreases of that the past good. That is refrigerator, old refrigerator will shift to a new refrigerator. So that means it becomes the inferior goods. So these are the goods whose demand increases if the consumer income increases. For example, if the income of the consumer increases, he will no more purchase. That means he will not purchase any new goods or any new varieties of the goods. He just immediately shifts the old into a new good. Definitely, the cost will become low or become less for them, and ultimately, the demand of that good will become decline, and that's called inferior goods. Now we can come up to the next factor, that is the expectation of change in the price of a commodity in the future. That's very true. It's all about predictions. It's all about that how a particular organization expect predict the price of one good and what would be the sort of decisions to be taken in the future for that particular good. And ultimately the demand for that good for the future or in the future will become change. So if the consumer expect that the price of a commodity will increase in the near future, that means the demand at present will also increase, because afterward if the consumers get to know that the price of the onion in the future will get increased, then ultimately those consumer will immediately buy onion at present. That means the demand of the onion will get increased, and that's become the one of the factor which influence the demand for the future will get changed due to a increase or decrease in the price of a commodity. So it means there is a positive relationship between a commodity expectation of change in its price in the future and the change in the commodity demand at the present. So automatically for the future decisions, future expectations will change the demand of the present commodity. For example, if a consumer expects the price of petrol will decrease in the future, he will not fix his vehicle petrol tank at present. Definitely, if the price of petrol will decrease in the future, then he will not fill any vehicle petrol tank at present. So after all, he will ready to pay the low price in the future for the petrol that will be used for the vehicle. And that's why it is one of the factor which ultimately influence the demand at present based on the prices of the future in the future. Next one is the taste and preferences. A consumer taste and preferences of a commodity, it's directly influence his or her demand for that commodity. So automatically the demand will also get influenced by the taste and preferences of a consumer for a particular commodity. So the taste and preference of the consumers includes the customs, traditions, religion, habits, lifestyle, fashion, etc. For example, if an item of a clothing is in trend or a fashion, people will be more likely to purchase that particular cloth and it increases its demand. For example, if any of the Puma shoes it's getting popular, it is in trend among the youth, it is a fashion trend. That means the youth and all the people will more likely to buy a Puma shoes immediately, and ultimately it increases its demand. That means it totally depends on the taste and preferences of the consumer which influence the demand. That means that any of the popular product comes in the market and the consumer taste and preference will get changed at that point of time or period of time, then ultimately it increases its demand. Now we can come up to the next section, that what are the determinants which influence the market demand. So there are three main determinants or the factors which influence the market demand, that is season and weather, distribution of income, size and composition of population. So let's have an overview with the help of example or to understand these factors individually. So the first one is season and weather. The seasonal and the weather conditions of any of the state or region will definitely influence the demand for a commodity. For example, in places like Himachal, the demand for warm clothes is high as compared to the summer clothes because there are more and more, you can say, as it is a hilly area, the more and more you can see snowfall or the weather is very cold in that particular period of time in the Himachal as compared that they don't need any summer clothes. They need only the warm clothes to face the situation at that particular period of time. So that's called, and that automatically the market demand would get influenced, not an individual demand, it's market demand. Because here I'm talking about the Himachal, I'm talking about this one state. That means I'm talking about the market demand. That means if it is a winter, it's almost the Himachal, the most of the months are in winter. So automatically the demand for the warm clothes is very high as compared to the summer clothes in the Himachal. Because the winter months are more as compared to the summer months. Next one is distribution of income. The demand for commodities will be high in countries if there is an equitable distribution of income. The demand for commodities will be low if there is no proper distribution of income. So automatically it depends that how the demand for a commodity, it totally depends on those countries who are very developed where the demand of the commodities are high and they can equally distribute the income. But the demand for commodities will be low if there is no proper or accurate distribution in the country. And uneven income distribution means the people who are living in that country are very rich or very poor. So that means it refers to a distribution of income. Next is size and composition of population. The size of the country population is also influence a commodity market demand. If the population size of a country increases, that means the market demand will also get increased. The more and more consumers will buy more and more units of commodities or consume more and more units. That means the market demand will also get increased as the population size will get increased. So the number of people living in the country, their composition like male to female ratio, older people, youngsters, children, adults are also affect the market demand. For example, if a country has a large population of children, the market demand for goods like toys, chocolates, ice creams will be more. So, if we talk about the youngsters, if the country has a large population of youngsters, then the market demand for goods like momos, chowmein, pizza, burger will be more. So that's why the market demand will also get influenced by the size of a country population. Now we can come up to the next section that is called the demand function. Demand function refers a functional relationship between the quantity demanded of a particular good and the factors which influence the demand. That's exactly called the demand function. It can be It can be with respect to an individual demand or includes the all consumers in the market, which refers to a market demand function. So demand function is categorized into two demand functions, that is the individual demand functions and the market demand function. But the demand functions is automatically depends upon the all those factors which influence the demand. So let's talk about the individual demand function. It refers a functional relationship between the individual demand for a commodity and those factors which influence the individual demand or demand. That's called the individual demand function. It can be expressed as demand of individual good, say X, which is a functional relationship or the factors which influence the demand, that is the price of good X, preference, taste and preferences, then income, then any other taste, then of course the expectation and the price of the any other related goods, etc. So here the terms is already written, the DX, that is a demand for commodity X. P is the price of given commodity X, that is price of a related good, that is PR. Y is the income of the consumer, T is the taste and preferences, and F is the expectation of a change of price in the future. So these are the factors who ultimately influence the demand. That means if any of the functional relationship between the demand for a commodity and the factors which influence that same demand, that becomes the individual demand function. Let's talk about the market demand function. It refers to a functional relationship between the market demand of a particular commodity and the factors which influence the market demand, that becomes the market demand function. As I stated or explained earlier, the market demand is influenced by all the factors that also influence the individual demand. In addition to such factors, it is more the additional three main factors which are more influence, that is the population size and composition, season and weather, and income distribution. And the rest of the factors will remains the same as also influence the individual demand also and the market demand also. It is expressed as the demand for commodity X, that is a function of price of a given commodity X, price of a related goods, income of the consumer, that is Y. T stands for taste and preferences of the consumer. F is the expectation of a change of a future price. PO, that is the size of the population or size and the composition of the population. S is a season and weather. D is a distribution of income, which I have already explained that these three main factors which influence the market demand, and the rest of the factors will remain the same as it also influences the individual, same for the market demand as well. Now we can come up the next section or next concept that's called the demand schedule. A demand schedule is a tabular representation which shows the different quantities of a commodity along with its different prices during a particular period of time. That's called demand schedule. So it is a tabular representation which shows different commodities at different prices during point period of time. That's called demand schedule. In other words, it also shows the association between the quantity demanded and the price of a commodity. A demand schedule can be created for both individual buyers also and for the entire market as well. So there are two types of demand schedule. The first one is individual demand schedule and the second one is market demand schedule. So let's understand, you can see the definition with the help of the examples. So individual demand function refers a different quantities of a commodity that a particular consumer is willing and ability to pay to buy such commodity at a given price during a given period of time is called individual demand schedule. The next one is market demand schedule. It also refers to a different quantities of a commodity that not a individual consumer. It means that all the consumers are willing and ability to purchase that different commodities at different price level during a different or a given period of time is called market demand schedule. In other words, it is an aggregate of all individual demand schedules at all prices. That's also called market demand schedule. And the formula which will be used to calculate the market demand is DM, that is market demand is equal to demand of A consumer household या demand DB, that is demand of household B house plus household C, demand of household C, demand of household D. Then when we combine all together, it becomes market demand. When we combine the units of different, you can say, consumers, it becomes market demand. So this is an example of an individual demand where the price is already shown 10987. That means the price is decreasing and the quantity demanded is increasing from 20 to 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. That means the every difference of 1 rupee in price level of a commodity, the quantity demanded will also get increased by rupees by 1 unit of a particular commodity. So, as shown in the schedule, as the decrease in the price of commodity X, the quantity demanded will become increased because when we look up the concept of the demand, the individual demand and the factors, which is one of the price is one of the factor which influence the demand. So there is an inverse relationship between the price and quantity, as it is shown in the table as well, that the price is declining and the quantity demand of a commodity X is increasing. That means there is an inverse relationship between both terms. The consumer is willing to buy 20 units at 10 when the price drops to 9, 8, and so on. The quantities of a demand would get increased to 21 units and so on. So automatically, to conclude this schedule, demand schedule, it's showing an inverse relationship between the price and quantity demanded. That means the demand curve of of a commodity X is upward sloping, because as the demand is increasing, then automatically the shape of the demand curve is upward sloping. Now we can come up with the market demand. So this is a case of a market demand and how to calculate the market demand in units are. So these are the prices which has been given to you, that is the 10 to 5, that is a decline in prices, and the as you can see, the individual demand in units, the household A and household B demand, and we can look up the demand is increasing in both the household cases A and B, then automatically it shows an inverse relationship between the price and the market demand for a commodity. But the market demand of a commodity, when we add up the individual demands of both household, it comes or it leads to a market demand in units. So the demand household A demand, that is DA and DB. Once we add the units of the household A and B, we get the market demand. So 20 plus 22, it becomes 42. 21 plus 23 becomes 44, and so on. So if you look up the market demand, is also showing the upward sloping curve. That means it shows the price and the market demand shows an inverse relationship between the quantity demanded and price. So as you can see in the above schedule or table, the market demand is calculated by adding up together the demand for both household A and B at various prices. So market demand is 42 units at 10 units, 44 at 9 units, 46 at 8 units, and so on. Then to conclude this schedule, it indicates you can see the functional really inverse relationship between the quantity demand and price of a commodity, you can see X. Now we can come up to the next concept, that is called the law of demand. So what is law of demand? Law of demand refers to an inverse relationship between the price of a commodity and the quantity demanded of the same commodity. And keeping up all other factors remains constant or ceteris paribus. That means it remains fixed. It is also called a first law of purchase. That means where there is an inverse, whenever the price plays an important role, demand will also play an important role, and which ultimately shows a relationship between both of them, whether it always shows an inverse relationship rather than positive relationship, because law of demand indicates an inverse relationship. So if law has reveals inverse relationship regarding the demand of a particular commodity, that means the inverse relationship to be shown, and it show, and that's why the price is one of the factor which shows an inverse relationship rather than considering the other factors constant. So these are the basic facts of the law of demand. The law of demand states that every other factors remains constant. So there is an inverse relationship between the both terms, that is the price and the quantity demanded of a particular product or service. The demand curve slopes downwards from left to right. So as we are showing up the inverse relationship, so the automatically the shape as the demand decreases, so the shape will automatically decline. That means the shape of a demand curve slopes downward, or in other words, statistically it shows a negative correlation between the price and the quantity demand of a commodity. The law of demand applies in both individual consumer level and across the entire market as well. The law of demand is also linked or related to the concept of diminishing marginal utility, which always reveals that as the consumer consume more and more units of any commodity, the additional satisfaction level of that consumers is derived from each additional unit declines. So automatically their additional satisfaction can be easily calculated from the each additional units when it leads to decline or decrease. And that's become the law of diminishing marginal utility. So if the consumer consume more and more units, then automatically their satisfaction level would also getting a decline with the passage of time towards that commodity, and that becomes a diminishing marginal utility. Now we can come up to the assumptions of law of demand. The price of a substitute good does not change. The price of a complementary goods will remains constant. The income does not change. The taste and preference remains the same. The people do not expect any future price of the commodity to change. That means all of the factors will remain constant. So this is how the law of demand curve will be shown. So the price it's shown is 4321, that means price is decreasing and the demand for any of the commodity will be increasing. Then automatically you can see in the graph where the x-axis, the quantity demanded in units has been shown, and on the y-axis the price of a commodity X has been shown. And if you draw the diagram from the x-axis, the basically the units, that means the quantities has been shown 2, 4, 6, 8. So just line up 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, and the y-axis the price level is 1 to 4, so we can write down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So price is 4 and we have to mark 2. So we have look up the y-axis at price level 4 and just mark the demand, quantity demand, that is 2. Next we come up 3. 3 is a price, so when we just mark the 3 is a price, and demand is 4. So just mark on the second slot, you can mark on the second dot, you can mark as 4 units. In prices 2, you have to mark 6 units. So the price is 2, just mark at 6 units. And the price is 1, the 8 units. So when you see, look up the price at 1 and just immediately mark horizontally at 8 units. So once we mark all the 4 units, just draw a line which stands a downward sloping curve, which indicates an inverse relationship between the price and quantity demanded. So this is how that you can explain the law of demand using the graphical representation. Now there are various facts about the law of demand. one side, as the law of demand is only talk about the effect of a change in price on a change in the quantity demanded of a commodity. It will not reflect about any other factors except the price, and that's why it is a one-sided role to play, that is under the law of demand, inverse relationship. A law of demand always states that there is a inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded of a commodity. It means if the price of a commodity rises, the demand of the same commodity will decline, and vice versa. So that's why it remains the inverse relationship. It is more quantitative than quantitative. The law of demand makes only a qualitative statement, not a quantitative statement. It shows the direction of the change in the quantity demanded. If you look up the direction in the graphical representation of law of demand, where the demand curve shows a downward sloping, it just shows the direction that the demand for a particular commodity showing a downward slope. That means it shows the direction of the change in the quantity demanded, not the magnitude of the change. How much the area has been between to estimate, that is quantitative, but that will not show under the law of demand. No proportional relationship. Law of demand does not indicate any proportional relationship between the change in the price of commodity and the change in its demand. That means if a price of a commodity declined by 20%, then there is a rise in demand by 40%, 60%, 70%, 80%. That means it is no proportional relationship between any change in the both concept, that is price and the quantity demanded of a commodity. Now we can come up with the next concept, that is called the demand forecasting. It's all about estimating the demand for a product or service in the future, because after all, it refers to predictions about the demand of a particular product or service in the future, and that's become demand forecasting. Business uses this concept to forecast the demand for its commodity so that they can decide the production, pricing, inventory levels, or stock level as well. So with this, using this concept, the companies can easily anticipate the customer's demand and adjust their plans accordingly. The best example of demand forecasting is when a business uses the historical sales data to predict the demand in the future. That's become the best example of demand forecasting. So, and it's still at present, there are plenty of organizations or the enterprises who are using this concept, demand forecasting, so they can predict any of the demand of any for any product while using up the historical sales data of the past years, and this is called a trend analysis. So the trend analysis, when business uses any past data to predict any future demand any future demand, then automatically they uses of one of the statistical or demand forecasting technique that's called the trend analysis. And the company can also use any other data sources to predict demand, like weather patterns, economic indicators, customer surveys as well. So there is also another methods to use to predict the demand for any of the product, and any company can use the weather patterns, economic indicators, and the customer survey as well. And that is also that is one of the example of the demand forecasting. Why demand forecasting crucial for business? Because of these five reasons. It improves planning. It helps to manage the inventory level. It helps to rectify the errors. It informs the long-term business planning. It helps the businesses to stay ahead of the competition. So that's why the demand forecasting is very important for business on businesses. So let's have an overview of one of all these terms. Improve planning. So the primary objective of demand forecasting is to help the businesses so that they can improve their planning. So for better understanding about the future demand, the business can uh, take up a decisions to have a better production, inventory level, pricing decisions. They can take up accordingly. So to planning would be improved according to the forecasting of a demand, and which also leads to an increased profits and decreased costs. It helps to manage inventory level. Demand forecasting plays a very important or make it ensure to the companies to have a proper inventory level so that they can meet up the customer's demand. So if the demand is high, business can increase their production to meet up the customer demand. If the demand is low, then companies can reduce the production to avoid the excess stock. So it will save money and save cost and keep the customers more happy. Next is it helps to rectify the errors. Demand forecasting is also one of the tools so that they can help the business to rectify or to avoid any inaccurate assumptions about demand, inaccurate numbers about demand. And it will help the business to rectify errors in their planning and production process as well. So with such an accuracy level in the demand forecasting, business can easily avoid errors or mistakes, and accordingly, if the errors has been found, it will negatively impact their bottom line. It informs long-term business planning, so automatically demand forecasting always helps to avoid the errors in the short term, but in the long-term business planning, it always informs various decisions is to be taken in advance. So the accurate demand forecast helps the businesses to make more informed decisions about their long-term growth strategy, and demand forecasting will help them to take an informed decisions about the long-term growth strategies. And it also helps the businesses to achieve their long-term goals and objectives as well. It helps the businesses to stay ahead of the competition. So when they get to know about the demand in the future, so definitely you can say demand forecasting will help to stay ahead with the competition, to be into a market and just face the competition level. So with the efficient demand forecasting in place, business can better understand the customer needs and preferences, and accordingly they fulfill their demands, and company can easily make an adequate changes, and they can anticipate the changes in demand and adjust their plans accordingly after doing up the demand forecasting or any predictions about the demand of a particular product in the future. These are the types of demand forecasting, that is the predictive analysis, conjoint analysis, time series analysis, macro, micro demand forecasting. So let's have an overview about these four types as well. The first one is the predictive analysis. So predictive analysis all about the predictions about the demand, and they can use the various tools like artificial intelligence, machine learning algorithms to predict the demand. In this way, they can analyze the data to identify the patterns, the relationship between the variables, which will be used to forecast the demand. And the businesses or the organization using this tool, that is called the predictive analyst, to generate the demand forecast for the various products and services. So automatically the research, extensive research and development is always being done to apply any sort of demand forecasting method, and it can be used if the company uses the historical data using the mathematical models to develop and predict the future demand for a product. Next one is conjoint analysis. Conjoint analysis is also the one of the demand forecasting techniques, which is mainly used to survey the customers and asking them to trade off the different product features. For example, a customer might be asked to choose between two different products A and B, and product A has a higher quality but it's more expensive, while B is a lower quality but it's cheaper. So demand forecasters can better understand the customer preferences and make more accurate demand forecast for understanding how the customer trade off different features. So automatically the customers know exactly that in what way they trade off of different products or different products or reach out by analyzing the different features of the products. But demand forecast, this technique is always being used to identify that how the customer preferences will become changed, what sort of behavior uh, the customers are actually prefer to trade off different features for different products. So conjoint analysis is one of the technique that will be used to forecast the demand for new products and for existing products to be modified, or you can say in a new feature can be adopted by the feedback of the consumers. Next one is time series analysis. Time series analysis is always use the historical data to predict the future demand, and it is one of the most common method or technique used by the organizations, because for the businesses, a long sale data history are actually needed to predict the future demand of a new product. So this techniques, this method or technique will use to ensure the demand patterns, and it helps to predict the demand for the seasonal products like a seasonal fruit we can talk about, a seasonal vegetable we can talk about, that how much the months it would get into a profitable business. So business need to have at least a year worth of data so that to use this method effectively. So if any of the organization having want to predict their long-term sales, you can see in the future for a new product, definitely this method will be more useful. And in today's scenario, the various organizations are using this technique for a new product and how it will predict the demand. That method, the time series analyst will uh, obviously reveal that. Next one is macro and micro demand forecasting. So micro demand forecasting is mainly used for the businesses to make pricing decision, inventory, production type of decisions. So automatically it mainly focus on the individual perspective, where the individual pricing of a product, individual stock level of a product, individual production, the seasons of a product, and micro demand forecasting estimate the demand for a specific product or service in the particular market, and it considers factors like a seasonal customer loyalty and the promotions as well. Next one is macro demand forecasting. So macro demand forecasting will also estimates the demand for a journal category for the products in a given period of time or a given market. So it generally considers the factors like economic indicators, demographic trends, social factors like culture, religions, lifestyle, fashion. So it always used by the business to make up a decision that how they will target the you can see the right age of population about for the marketing purpose or expansion investment purposes as well. So when we talk about the macro demand forecasting, we are actually using up the demand for the journal categories of products like leaf generator. We can talk about the consumer daily needs product like Maggi, butter, milk, sugar, tea, coffee. That we talk about the macro demand forecasting. So if any new product will come up, or any new tea variant has come up in the market, then definitely the macro demand forecasting tools will be used. But if we talk about any specific like luxury cars, like a Range Rover, so if we talk about like that specific product, that how what decisions to be made related to pricing, stock, their production, then the macro demand forecasting will be used, but it totally depends upon the seasonal factors about the customer loyalty and what would be their expectations and the promotions level as well. And that becomes the macro demand forecasting. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for listening this lecture. I will come up to the more and more interesting, important, and relevant topics in the upcoming session. So till time, thank you and namaste to all.